Oh, I messed up the camera again. Hello, everybody. Oh, there we go. Wild Rubin appeared on the screen. Let's go. All right, let's test
Hello.
audio. Okay, let us know, guys, if the audio of Rubin and mine is fine. If I'm not too loud, if Rubin is not too loud. Quickly.
Hello. How do I sound, everybody? Apparently, Chad is gonna help us figure out if I
Apparently,
sound good.
I am a bit too loud myself. Let's adjust it. Am I fine now? Nice. And the nice shiny VIP in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do I sound fine now, chat? Don't type joke. Don't type joke. The joke is like, I think there is like 30% chance you get timed out.
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna be talking about at the first about the last year a bit and about the worlds, what happened, the event. So Rubin,
Mm-hmm.
like you were with me at the studio and the
Yeah.
crew. How did what did you feel about the vibe and the fact that we were like in studio and the casting, everything happened live at the coverage?
Yeah. So live coverage is something that is not anything we've had for Runeterra. Like when Lore launched, it was right at the beginning of COVID. I remember we launched our game, and then we all packed up our desks and went to work from home, and it's just been the kind of like the Lore has always existed during the pandemic. So for the first time, like one, I don't think I've had a few events, like with Arcane, and the League 10-year anniversary where I got to like see some players, but that was the first time where I, saw a bunch of players who are really passionate about lore all come together and cover like such a wonderful event with like the brand new meta and everything. So it was a combination of just like almost like weird because it was like what, like I haven't really seen an in-person Runeterra event, and this like almost extreme like pride and like fulfillment of like wow, we actually have this competitive event with this beautiful stage and cast and all like the best players in the world playing. So yeah, it was really awesome. What did you think about it?
I mean, the way it was set up, the production was so high quality. This was my first time being on the other side because I'm competing for 15 years and I was actually always on the player side, not never on the like
Mm-hmm.
casting and production side. So that was a very great experience. And like seeing how it works and how it was set up, like it was so cool. And to be a part of this, absolutely amazing. Like you mentioned the Arcane and meeting the players. Like we've met first time at the Arcane
Mm-hmm.
event final, and I remember that we were playing like the players against devs. I brought
Yeah.
fun decks. Devs? Only meta! Like I'm playing Plunder on my round one. I'm like, what the hell? Like,
Yeah,
come
that's
on!
actually a kind of a joke, a little joke at work. Neil Anderson, Riot Quaggy, is like one of the engineers on Lore, and I always joke that he's the world champ because he beat Alan in the for fun when you were playing for fun decks. Hey, I thought you're what was it? You were playing like the TF Sivir or something silly.
Yeah, I played some
What?
Sivir. I don't remember what exactly with Sivir. Sivir Jace, I believe. And
Oh, okay.
something else. I was
See, I
play.
remember it differently though. I remember you were like, "This is the best deck." And
I
you were
was
so proud of it,
mimic
and
a
you came and
bit.
you showed it to me. You're like, you should be playing this, and I was like, okay, sure. And then you lost.
I
You got
got
0-2'd
beaten.
on it.
Yep,
That's rough.
yep. That sounds right.
I
Going
mean, they
back.
both have quick attack. There's something there, maybe.
That was a good tempo 4 play, but I guess what? Against Plunder, you develop turn 4, and yeah, turn 5 you're dead. So not much of a tempo right there.
Yeah, it's tough.
Going back to the world stuff,
Mhm.
yeah, like how did you feel about we had a 10-day shift of the complete meta, new expansion, new champions, and players had to prepare and like not only skill express in just piloting the decks, but
Yeah.
also building them.
Yeah, honestly, you know, and this is my personal feelings because I don't want my personal feelings to be confused with, like formats we will use in the future. I think that it is good to have a, a sort of a mix of sometimes having tournaments that are more on established metas and sometimes having tournaments that are, the exciting new cards are out, really test innovation and almost your ability to adapt. And a lot of the times, like you mentioned, deck building is really difficult in these sort of tournaments. But a lot of times playing is hard too. You might not know exactly how an interaction works. Even if you play test a ton, somebody might be showing up with a deck you haven't seen, and then you're playing a matchup for the first time. And I really enjoy that type of gameplay where there's like less known information. Though I think there's definitely a place for both like set meta is settled tournament and a tournament that is more testing different skills. In terms of the Worlds coming out with the World Ender, I think it was really, really successful. Like I honestly, the whole I was very adamant and the team was very adamant that players would be able to test the format before the tournament with kind of secret accounts. And it was a lot of work for us to get that all set up. And part of that was actually releasing the entire file of the set, which was a very spicy topic where, essentially we usually have all of our YouTube videos. We still had those in all of our promotional campaigns for the new sets. And this time around, we, to do that and to have there be that, competitive integrity for the tournament, we basically needed to give all players the cards because we didn't want there to be an unfair advantage, of a certain player sharing information with their team and then them helping them out and another player who doesn't have a team or doesn't have that many resources. So we were just like, let's just release it to everybody. Maybe that costs us for excitement of the set, but then the tournament itself is going to be really, really cool. And I love the idea of that sort of like pre-testing. So even though it was a new meta, like I really like how we executed it, where players were able to sort of, obviously a week or 10 days or whatever it was is not quote, an infinite amount of time, but I think it's enough time where if you dedicate some practice that you'll be able to, really get an advantage if you go super deep.
So regarding the fact that you allowed players to share the practice account was a very good decision because obviously you're right. Some players are like law abiding and they would never break a rule, like one player and that's it. I can practice only with that one player. I have less time to practice and the rest would be, oh hell no, we are here like 10 people just rotating out. So it was a really good call. And like we talked about it before, we knew that would happen and you coming ahead and solving that issue was a very good touch right there.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a combination of me and the team, actually. That's the kind of situation where it helps to have super competitive players who have done pro play, like, in the room, because we definitely are more likely to hit that. But I actually think that was, I can't remember whose it was, but I think that was actually somebody else's idea. Then we're like, wait, but we have to release the whole set. Can we do that? And then, we had all sorts of meetings behind the scenes to figure out, okay, can we release the whole set before all the spoilers are out to just everybody? And we really made it happen. And that's what I actually like about Riot is just that, everybody really wants to do what's the best for players. And everybody has different expertises, and we all trust each other to be doing that. And Worlds was just kind of like a culmination of a bunch of different people coming together and being like, you know what? Like, if that's what's best for players, we're going to figure out a way to get it to work. So really proud of the team.
So regarding like the Riot part, I could feel that first time when I went to the arcade event, second time when I went for the Worlds casting, like whenever you get to work or like get to meet with people from the Riot, you really feel like it's something else. Like you immediately feel like it's just a family. There's so many cool people around there. Like once you meet them, it's just all the homies. Like it's so amazing. Like I really feel like you just feel like warm and cozy. Like you feel like you're in your blanket and just chilling with people. Like we are out for the dinner and we had a blast. Like you are speaking to the head, like to the Sherman, to you, to Michelle. Like all of you are the big deals now, right? Like and you just feel like you are like even with those people. They are like no, they are not like feeling like they are like way ahead of other way above other people
Right.
because of their position. It's just really cool thing.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how we roll, you know. I think here we make sure that we, at least on the design team, we don't really care where ideas come from, right? As long as they're good ideas, which I think is something that is often unique to Riot. And I think in terms of everybody being on the same level, like you can have a conversation with anybody at Riot, you know, CEO or QA person or production, like, and they're gonna, you know, we all have that same mindset of doing what we think is right for players, right? And I think that that lets you just be able to have those conversations and have the sort of best results. But in terms of like, yeah, I can't agree with you more. It's one of my best friends, Frank Scarin, Riot Vriss, is somebody who, you know, joined the team a lot. He's one of the old people who's been on lore a long time with me, and he's one of my best friends and sits next to me every day. So it's great to see him every day. Shout out to Frank.
Shout out to Frank. So I don't know if you are aware, but nowadays when we jump into like the tournament games, we fire up the stats spreadsheet, we look at the matchup tables, and oh, this is 62%. That's fine, we can leave this deck. And you just make the bans based on the percentages. When we went to the Worlds, no stats, brother. You have to go by your feeling. And like I was doing the predictions, what players will ban, and you could see when the more experienced player were in the playing and like competitive, the more that's like I'm bragging about myself a bit, but yeah, they were actually accurate with bans I was predicting, and the player with less experience, they were a bit sometimes a bit iffy, and it was coming out with the bans because there is no stats they usually took to back it up when they were playing the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, the fresh meta thing it definitely changes the way players play. I remember when I was watching in studio, like, and I was seeing, and I saw that Aragorn banned Seraphine. I think that's what happened. Sorry if I misremembered that. But I think Teddy's other opponents in the top 8 didn't ban Seraphine, and I'm just like, okay, like, you know, he's watching, he's adapting, he knows what Teddy's best on, you know? And then he ended up shipping the tournament, so it definitely pays off to have those fresh. Sorry, I guess we've talked about it a while, but I can't agree more that it does make the tournament much more exciting because there's almost some assumption that there is going to be imprecision. Like you mentioned, oh, you know, in a normal tournament you just look at a website and see your ban, but when you can't do that, you generally see some more misplays or some decks that aren't built as well as they can be. Because of like it's so early in the format, right? And you don't always know the matchup, and that honestly makes games a little bit more exciting, to be honest.
When you look at the deck, like there is also a skill when you look at the deck, and you have to imagine how it's gonna interact with the decks that most likely gonna be left on your side. How my deck, like if you didn't get to test into this deck, just thinking, okay, how will I do? Like it's top heavy on. Top removal, it doesn't have much to deal with the lower threats, so like the tough units with Vayne, where you make all those cheap units actually annoying to deal for Seraphine, makes the a matchup extremely good for the Vayne, for example. And it's like figuring those stuff out I think it's really fun when you are going into the ban phase.
Figuring all that stuff out on the fly is, I mean, it almost feels more like what we'd call like a limited mode, like expeditions, where it's like you're in a new situation every single game or every single turn. So that's really exciting. And there's also just the innovation standpoint, because I can't remember all the lists since it was a while ago, but I'm pretty sure that Aragorn like specifically had Crimson Pigeon, right?
Yeah.
In his Noxus Shadow Isles Hallow deck. And I'm pretty sure most people didn't have that. Like, other players hadn't figured out that was a really good card for the deck, and he played it a lot more aggressively, and it paid off. And it's just it's just you love to see it. I just think that he's a very deserved winner, obviously. But you get to see that kind of things in a fresh meta, and that is something that we're actually thinking about next year. Is that how do we get more tournaments in fresh metas? Because I think right now, you know, we have the seasonal, and oftentimes the seasonal comes at the end of a season, which I think is we like the idea of having an exciting, okay, this is the sort of celebration, culmination of a whole season of play. But what we don't necessarily like is that sometimes when the season starts, it's like, well, there's going to be a balance patch, maybe a hotfix. Until then, there's no really reason to play or compete until that very end. So we will be trying to figure out more ways to incorporate. I wouldn't go too far as say worlds like, oh, there's a tournament the day after the set's released. But we will be trying to speed up that loop between card release and then tournaments. That matter for sure.
So going back, like before we jump into that, could because some of us have seen your interview with the mastering Runeterra, could you quickly go over like what's the plan? Because you announced and also you tweeted about the beta tournament system. Could you just cover this quickly in 5-10 minutes?
So first, just a caveat: I had to announce an announcement, but. But we are moving to a new tournament system this year. And one thing that I want to ask of all players is, one, we really need your feedback. Like, it's going to be transitioning from an old system to a new one. And two, we also just like need your patience because, it takes a lot of tech work and a lot of figuring things out to get things right. So that's what I ask. But we are going to be starting with a brand new tournament sort of structure after this seasonal tournament. So there will be a patch on February 2nd. That's a balance patch. And in that patch, we're going to be launching what I'm calling sort of the beta season of tournaments, which will include kind of, I don't want to go too deep into it. We're going to have more information on our website moving forward, as well as that part 2 of that Mastering Runeterra podcast coming out closer to when the seasonal launches. But what you will see in there is just new types of tournaments and new formats, and as well as some new rewards. I realize that is quite vague, but at this point, that's where we're at with the tournament. So definitely check that out when it comes out.
And that's really exciting to say. To hear. Tell me, what are your goals with the competitive, and like what's the go-to, what you want to meet in terms of? Do you want them to be more open for the casual players? Do you want to improve the experience of like the pro circuit that looks to to compete and perhaps like they make the living out of it? Do you want to make it more often, like not only like in a rotation between 2-3 months, perhaps like every month, every 5 weeks perhaps? What's the goal here? Internal goal.
Yeah, so we have a few goals. Really, we are trying to do two things at once. We're trying to cater to current competitive players. So we basically want systems that have more frequent and more meaningful tournaments. And as part of that, we're introducing more, like I said, tournaments and fresher metas as well as new formats. But also we want to sort of have a higher competition, both to get to Worlds and more like inter-region competition at Worlds. So we're working on ways for us to have more international competition and more sort of ongoing leaderboard style events for qualification. So expect more details of that in the future. But we're also looking to increase the inclusion and participation. So one thing I'm happy to say is that we are going to have tournaments similar to seasonal tournaments called the Runeterra Opens. And the Runeterra Opens are going to have, I'm not going to get into the details too much, but they will give you rewards and potential qualifications to future worlds. But to hit our goals, we are making them open to play. That's why they're called a Runeterra Open, which essentially means there's going to be no qualification requirement. Instead of having to get top 700 on the ladder or win an LCQ, anybody's going to be able to play, which I think is going to be really, really exciting to bring more players into the tournament scene. At the same time, though, we're going to have systems in place to sort of reward consistency over the course of the year, which means our current competitive players and PvP players like yourself or any other people like Aragorn. Oh, sorry, not Aragorn. I'll talk to him about him later. But other competitive players will be able to accrue points over the course of the year and qualify for that Worlds this year. So yeah, our values are kind of like both getting more participants and then also really serving our like current core PvP audience. Which I said this on the MR podcast, but I'll say it again. It's like those are two kind of opposite things. So it's it's really ambitious of us to do that. The other thing we want to do, and this is just being transparent, is we do want tournaments to be more sustainable. Like one of the things that we are doing is, developing more automation for tournaments and having like less law. Like the seasonal tournament right now, I think is great because it's that Swiss format, but it also can be a really long weekend for players. And for us as devs too, like, I have to do the refereeing and we have people that are on call if anything goes wrong. So we are working on ways to kind of streamline the system so that it's both easier for new players, but also easier for us as devs to have, tournament every day or tournament every month, requires a bit more, I'm not going to say precision, but ability to sort of run more tournaments without having to sort of, I call it like carrying the golden egg. Like seasonals right now are like, this thing that we really focus on every 2 months, and we kind of want to spread that out, if that makes sense. Where like players have more opportunities to compete and win.
That really sounds amazing. I'm really looking forward to. I'm sure that you guys noticed like how much community puts effort into doing the community events, edges, like even money show. How those are, I always forget the name, but basically the wages between players or even the regions. Like we had the NA versus EU. We have like whenever like there is like, oh mine, like this deck is better than this. It's favorite. No, it's not. All right, let's do money match. Oh, money match. There you go. Like I'm sure you've seen those happen around.
Yeah.
Yeah, grudge matches. How do you feel about perhaps, maybe not yet this year, maybe next year, some in-game tournament for the community? Just
So I can talk about that in terms of
okay.
In terms of cash tournaments, like that's what I'm kind of hearing you say, like specific buy-in tournaments.
Doesn't have to be a buy-in, just being able to just run it in the client. Like let's say I can click 32, 64, 128 tournament, just run it in the game, like let's say Swiss, and then into Top Cut, and like I can run it in the client, not on the third-party website, but that players can just press register, sign up your decks, and just everything happen in the client. It doesn't have to even be buying in the client. Just because those things are very easy to sort outside of the client. But just just to make it accessible for the players, and like even perhaps like the notice board that there is a tournament coming, and like and it can be shown it's run by the community, it's run by the Riot, like, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so tournaments. Sort of a feature that lets players run tournaments. I think that's something that we are all, and I've talked to Dave about this. I think we're very excited about that type of feature. I think where we're at now, I wouldn't expect anything like that in the near future, since our focus is on getting the beta, the new tournament seasons online. And because it's one of those interesting situations where like I do think that giving players the tools to make tournaments can make you sustainable long term. I mean, I think one of the like the example I use, which is kind of a weird one, is like the Warcraft 3 like map editor. Arguably why I'm here at Riot today, is something that can make a game sustainable forever, right? Like you just have players create the content. Players will create tournaments. Players will create new maps, stuff like that, new formats. That said, in terms of the community stuff, it like definitely agreed. It's something we want to work towards and eventually have in-client tournaments, because I think that's actually one of the big differentiators of seasonal tournaments than some of our competitors, is having seasonal tournaments like all in client for you, where you don't have to go to Battlefy or some third-party website, makes the experience so much better, especially for players who are playing on their phones, which, over half of our games are being played on mobile, so that's something we think about. I'm not necessarily dodging it because the question.
No, no,
But
no,
to
no.
be very specific, I wouldn't expect that to come out this year, but it's something we're exciting about. What I do want to do though is I'm interested in, and sorry, we are interested in partnering with the community in terms of figuring out, okay, maybe we can have specifically if we're doing new Runeterra opens or like daily tournaments, can we have streamer tournaments where the streamer makes the format and we have that in client for you, or we work with players like other content creators to figure out what sort of big events we can have. Because I think one of the goals of inviting everybody to the Runeterra Opens is I'm hoping that they're kind of community celebrations where it's like, oh, this Runeterra Open is Eternal. That's a brand new format. Like everybody needs to get working, and everybody will be in Alan's stream being like, what Dex please, Dex please. So to sort of answer your question in a different way, I'm excited about figuring out how to have more community involvement in terms of what formats we pick, because I think that I'd even love to have the ability for players to sort of like vote on what formats they'd like to see in game. And I'm talking anywhere from standard Eternal, but more like wacky things, like starting with extra mana gems and stuff like that. Since I think one of the things we really want to do is we want tournaments to have a competitive feel. I think right now gauntlets kind of don't always feel like they're that competitive, but at the same time we want players to experience variety. So we'll be doing a mix of like, your standard best of threes, but we'll also throw in things like singleton, just to give players some ability to sort of escape the standard ranked ladder, the meta that they're sort of in at that current time. So sorry for the long answer there. The short of it is probably not something we're doing this year, but ideologically, I think players building tournaments is something that, and they can run in client, is something that is really exciting. Hopefully we can do some stuff with the community this year, partner with streamers for formats, stuff like that, to enable some of that similar stuff. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, that's an excellent bridge between like doing the in-game client stuff and like increasing the amount of the competitive events throughout the year. Because like personally, I'm a big fan of the EU Master format we had. Like the team brings 7 decks or X amount of the decks, and you have to ban 2-3 decks, and then you have to mastermind into properly picking the correct decks. And like I would love to see that back, and that kind of stuff. Also, yeah, and of course, like first of all, focus on see how it goes with the beta tournament system. If all goes well, if that goes out of the beta, then I suppose you can move on. Because of course, I realize that this meets your goals as well, because like if you gonna put in the in-game tournament system, it increases the amount of the tournaments, it makes it more like it not appealing, but like the second language barrier, it allows more players to compete pretty much, right? So it meets your goals, but you can't of course work on both of these things at once, because like you need to have the stats and how does the beta stuff do, right? So going from that, how the ladder importance shift away for competitive stuff. Like for example, now ladder matters a lot. Like you need to play ladder to compete. How will this shift away, and will ladder still relevant to be important?
Yeah, so our current plan, and without revealing too much, so just to be clear, like we're gonna have our beta season coming out. Things will not be set in stone as much, where I don't think we'll have any direct paths to world qualifications during the beta season, because it's not quite ready yet, and it's not quite stable enough in terms of like, hey, we think that this is the best thing we can be doing. In terms of ladder play, we're doing a few things, because I think I agree with you that ladder matters a bit too much, and that was a bit of an overshot, where I think, and I talked about the system, we used to have the system with seasonal points, top 4s, and ranked points, right? And I think our thinking at the time was, well, ladder should matter, but it shouldn't be the most important thing. That's why ranked ladder points was only, a third of the qualifications, where tournaments got 2/3 of the qualifications. The tiebreaker, unfortunately, I think meant it mattered a bit more than it did, and we've learned some lessons from that. What the big lesson that I've learned is that um, loss prevention, like the fact that you can go 7-2 instead of 8-1, is really, really, really powerful and not something we should give out lightly. I think buys are actually, which is like a free win in a tournament, is a much fairer way to be a reward because it's not as good as getting that free loss. But it is something that helps you do better in the tournament. So that is, without going into details about how any of that will work, we're definitely hyper aware of that. In terms of like what's going to happen to ladder, since I know like yourself, you qualify for worlds through ladder points. We are going to be incorporating ladder into the new system in a few ways. So one, there will be some. I don't want to tease too much, but we will be tying in some ladder stuff with the new rewards we're doing for tournaments. So there will be ways of getting additional ladder rewards. And we are also thinking about, not set in stone yet, and when we're ready, we will. So take anything I say now as we're not necessarily ready, but when we are ready, we will be sharing this with players. But with our new world system, it's going to be sort of like 1 points that rules them all kind of situation. Much simpler, where you just have tentatively called Runeterra points, where you get them for playing in tournaments. And we're thinking about the ranked ladder also giving you points, but not nearly the amount that you get from the bigger tournaments. So there will be some incentive for players to play ladder, but ladder will likely, if you just play ladder and you don't play any tournaments, there might not be any direct ways for you to qualify for worlds, but that will give you a big leg up in or not a big, but it will give you some leg up in qualifying for worlds, as well as some new rewards that we're tying with the tournament system. So that's kind of all I can say on that, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. We are hearing a lot about the new rewards. Maybe some prismatic exchanges, maybe something there. I'm just like on the copium.
Yeah.
I don't want. Mm-hmm.
So I won't get into the specifics of rewards, but one of the things that I'm really pushing for and the team is really excited about is this thing that we're calling accessible prestige. The idea of having like kind of prestigious rewards that show off what you've done. It's like kind of so you can just flex on people. Is the sort of less fancy way to say it, because I think right now, especially in Runeterra, where it's so easy to acquire all cards, there really isn't that feel of like collecting. And in tournaments, I think it's really cool to be able to show off your wins, to be able to show off that you did really well in a certain season, or that you top 8 of the seasonal tournament. So when we're thinking about rewards, I wouldn't think so deeply into like prismatics or new skins that we're giving out for tournaments, but more in sort of just like memorable items that you can like show off, either in the future, potentially in game, but for now you'll see how we're showing them off, so that you kind of know when you're playing against somebody, you can kind of see, oh, this is Alan, he's the world champion in 2021 and stuff like that, because that's one of the ways that I think oftentimes tournament players don't even get that excited about rewards, since they're sometimes the most dedicated, serious players who already really have everything. I know it. I know in other games sometimes players actively, and sometimes this is the case in Runeterra too. Like competitive players don't even want some of their cards to be prismatic. So yeah, our focus is really on prestige and not necessarily just lumping out tons of skins or tons of like cash prizes and things like that.
Just want to say the boards for like the seasonals and the card back was definitely a step into the right direction. People ask how to get those, and they want them. It's like often people during the seasonal like, oh yeah, I want to get there to get this. So it was definitely a step into the right direction, and hopefully you can work more on that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the seasonal board, we're going to a new system. The seasonal board will, we made that for all seasonals kind of in perpetuity. So we will figure out ways of having it to be relatively hard to earn, but we will certainly try to incorporate it in the new tournament system. So there will be some of the older cosmetics to get, but yeah, our focus, like I said, is on things that are pretty prestigious. And that's also something we need feedback on. Like what do players want to see? You know,
clickable boards. Click when you click on the board, something happens. I have to do something with my hands. You know, like I'm shuffling the deck when I play. I want to click on the board. Please make them clickable.
The Sentinels board is so nice. I think that's my favorite one.
Yes, please.
I'm very partial since I was the design lead on the Ruined King expansion, and it happened to come out with that. But yeah, Sentinels board is pretty goated because it can be clickable.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Or I wanted to ask you, but it dropped off my head. Oh, okay. How do you feel? Okay, we talked about this.
We can also maybe take a question.
Oh yeah, sure. We can do some questions as well. But before yet, a quick one to talk about a bit about the changes. More often changes, because we know that lore can't really do patches because of the mobile. They need a few like weeks or days before the changes come. But like when the big stuff happens that just slipped through the beta testing or alpha testing, like there's some Aatrox stuff, Seraphine stuff. Like, are you, like, we've seen that you are guys more eager recently to push hotfixes than before. Before, you had to go through the cycles. Now you go through the hotfixes more often. Is this something that's gonna stay?
Yeah, so I guess to answer, it's interesting because I would stay tuned to our official channels. We will have information coming out, not necessarily a roadmap, but more like what releases are going to be like this year. It will include more planned balance patches. I can say that for sure. So there will be maybe not necessarily hot fixes, but more frequent changes. In terms of our philosophy, first off, just shout out to Plink, David Smith. He's a game designer who suggested, who's been working on the patch that's coming out in February, and he definitely pushed to get some of the hot fixes in at the beginning of this month. So sometimes an individual effort, can really make a difference. And I forget, for the hotfix Worlds, it was almost, I think it might have been John Mormon, I Am Walrus, and David Smith, who's Plink. And it was kind of a combination of, like, we all got together. We were like, yeah, we should do something because we're going over winter break, and we don't want a super stale solved meta during that time while we're gone. So definitely just like shout out to the designers who put their neck out there and put the extra effort to get all those changes in. Since there's a lot of conversations, like you mentioned, around how do we make changes, how do we get them to players. Obviously, we try not to hotfix, especially because you end up just having a card change in between games. Like your Poppy was a 4/3, and then in your next game it's a 3/3 or a 2/3 or whatever, and you're just like, it's like, what the hell, like with no patch. So that's not a player experience we actually generally want players to have. So that's actually, I think, the biggest reason why you don't see hot fixes every day, because I think that is very churn worthy. Like, players have crafted those cards, they might be really practicing that deck for a certain tournament or whatever reason. So it can be really, really bad if those are changed outside of the patch cycle. In terms of our philosophy change, I will say that we actually do have a shift, because I think these last two hot fixes were done really well. Like the first one, stuff had just come out, so we didn't want to necessarily just nerf Aatrox into the ground. We didn't want to have this new exciting champion just be kind of unusable. And for the second one, I think we ended up hitting decks pretty hard with some of the changes, with the bar and the world ender change specifically. But I think that really brought the top level decks down, which allowed a lot more strategies to be viable and kind of a new meta to be solved. And both those decks are still quite playable, maybe even still good, which I think is a good thing, as long as players are going back to that experiment loop. In terms of our philosophy, sorry, there's a lot to say there. In terms of our philosophy, I think what's been nice for us is actually what we've learned. This is something that I've learned. I don't want to speak for the whole design team, but doing hotfixes actually helps our next patch be better. Because what happened, like let's say we have a patch every 2 months, and I think that players have kind of, given us feedback around, hey, like it takes forever to patch, and then you're patching the thing that was good last meta, and it's really stale by now, and we're all sick of it. I think that's happened in the past. But the hotfixes actually allow us to, like, for instance, with the World Ender change, we weren't sure if that was going to actually necessarily put Aatrox in line. We thought it would make him much more competitively closer to all the other decks, right? But the fact that we did that lets us learn, like, what the win rate is, what the play rate is of all these different decks before we actually launch the patch itself. So that's something that I've learned. So it's kind of a tool for us, I guess what I'm kind of saying in terms of hotfixes. In terms of philosophy, doing 2 hotfixes in a row was sort of something we were like, wow, if we do the second hotfix, all of a sudden players are going to expect tons of hotfixes. But ultimately, we think it was the best result for players to nerf Bar and World Ender, so we did it. And we will continue to do that. Like I mentioned about Riders always doing right for players, like we will push the hotfix button when we think it's absolutely necessary. So when you see a hotfix, you kind of know, like, oh, it was serious. Like the entire design team probably met up and was like, hey, like, and that's emergent work, right? That's stuff that we're all working on future things, and we all get together and try to figure out what the best thing is for players. So that is pretty serious. I think our philosophy is, hey, we can learn from these to make our future patches better. And we might be using them more in the future. We're much more willing to sort of get scrappy and make those kind of changes than we have been in the past. Sorry, that was a really, really long answer, but hopefully that makes sense.
I mean, I think I can speak for the community that we are very happy to see those. Like the last ones for this month, last month, they were on point, and just happy that you guys are willing to do them because they just make the playing just more fun.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where like I mentioned the resources, it does cost us a lot. There's the player cost of like, hey, my cards are literally changing between games, but there's also the dev cost of emergency getting everything into the game. And one of the things that also happens is like those changes are not always as well tested as a balance, if tested at all, compared to a balance change. So there's higher risk there, and there's a lot of work between our partner teams like QA and production and engineering. So definitely our philosophy has shifted a bit. Does that mean we're going to see more hotfixes this year than last? Not necessarily. Like, hopefully we ship champions
when
at a level that they're not completely breaking the game, but when they're needed, I think we'll be more willing to make them happen.
Very happy to hear. So there is a question that, like, it's often asked. I'm pretty sure that's not your department, but maybe you can put some light on it. Question from Onips, if the Riot will push more advertisement of lore on the main accounts and maybe a league client like TFT for more visibility and exposure.
Yeah, it's definitely not my department. I'm not really sure. I mean, I know that for tournament stuff, sometimes I interface with some of the TFT designers and tournaments people, but I'm not exactly sure if we're going to have sort of in-client stuff from our other products.
Okay, let's see if we have more questions. Put up, guys, the questions. Just make sure like it's within the Rubin's sort of department, because like obviously we can ask about the next president election, and we want Rubin probably won't know.
I can add a little bit where we're still doing things like the Xbox Games Pass, which is actually a pretty big advertisement deal where all of Riot's products had a link up to Xbox Games Pass, and I believe they have like 20 million players or something on that. So I think that you might not always necessarily see it, but that's not always necessarily geared to our players that already play. So yeah, we still are sort of doing that kind of thing, but you might not always internalize it as that.
Yeah, how do you feel about the rotation coming? Like, because that will come alongside the changes to the tournament, so this will all crush into one moment. So how do you feel about that?
So I can't specifically talk about like like when or like what exactly is changing with rotation. I can talk more from a design perspective and a player perspective. I mean, I'm excited for rotation. I remember years ago on lore. I think it was 2020 or 2021. We were like, man, we need to rotate in like 2022. Like 2 years is kind of the industry standard, and I was kind of like shocked that when we didn't, players didn't really seem to notice. I mean, this is kind of just to talk about the design perspective is I think rotation. Sorry, not I think I know that rotation makes the game better. Like it literally just first off, we're gonna have two formats, right? Instead of just having standard, we have standard and eternal. So we basically are getting two for the price of one, where you can still have that sort of same lore experience that you already were having, but in eternal. And there will be Runeterra opens for eternal. So I'm excited about there being players who are like specialists who are like, oh, I'm really good at eternal. I'm gonna try to qualify for worlds during the eternal season, right? Things like that. And then you have standards. So you just have more ways to play, which is really exciting. The other thing is that we're just able to sort of bring the power level down and reset in a way where we can keep making champions, but every champion doesn't have to be a Seraphine or Aatrox, right? In order to break into the meta. Because I think that's something we saw last year where we have champions, champions like Master Yi who are like cool designs, like Flo is like really fun. Getting his cost reduction is super interesting in deck building, but just aren't competitively viable. So I'm excited about a future where we can have more champions that come directly, not necessarily directly into the meta, but even they come under, and then we aren't necessarily in a situation where everything has to be this overbearing new mechanic, right? When I'm thinking of rotation, back in the day when I was a kid, young Ruben, when I was like 12 or 13, maybe I was more like 11, I had a notebook where I wrote Magic the Gathering decks. And there was this format called Extended, okay? And how Extended worked was it was a 3-year rotation, right? Which meant sometimes the format had 9 years worth of cards, and then it would cut from 9 to 6. And when the format cut to 9 to 6, I was like, it was actually so exciting. I see Alan's face. It's like, oh my god, like literally half of the format is going away. Like, what can I play with now? It's like, oh, these cards are rotating. And I used to like just write deck lists in class, like getting excited about it. So I can guarantee you that rotation is good for the game. Like, obviously, we heard a lot of feedback around, hey, what's happening to my favorite champion? What's happening to these archetypes? And that's definitely part of the cost of doing business. I'm hopeful that, in Eternal and using some alternative tournament formats, we can still have those champions have their chance to shine. Might not be in standard anymore, but you will, potentially be able to play them in other formats. And that's kind of a lot of pressure on tournaments to both have Eternal and sort of more wacky formats where you can see your champions be played. But ultimately, I think rotation is really good for card games, and that's not even the reason we're doing it. So we're pretty confident that moving forward, rotation is going to be exciting. I'm pretty excited about our implementation of it, where we'll be able to specifically get rid of cards. I think that will give us a lot of tools to just have a ton of fresh metas. I'm hoping that this year is the year of the fresh meta, right? Like new cards coming out, potentially more balance patches, maybe another like 1 or 2 more hot fixes than we used to have. So yeah, super excited about that. What are your thoughts?
I can't wait. Like, honestly, like you get like the two things happening pretty much at once. We'll be having like a balance, perhaps new cards. Also, some cards rotate out, so it'll like we know that some cards prevent other decks from being the meta. Like, I always bring the same example. Like, I called like Gohard TF being like the best deck in the game, but it's being held hostage from being good by, back then it was Feel the Rush, if I remember correctly. And like, once you nerf the deck was best deck in the game. But it couldn't be there until this deck existed. So I'm pretty sure we still have the decks like this in the game that are just held hostage still.
Yeah, and I think that the thing about decks being sort of unlocked is there's almost two different things. There's like a meta that holds a deck hostage, but then there's just like the power level of cards, right? Like I think the example that I always think of is I feel like Yasuo kind of reads like a champion that should be good. Like he's got a good stat line. He's kind of you get free removal with him. He's got a solid, really good champion spell with I think maybe not really good, but pretty good, right? Um, but sort of like as foundations went and as we had more and more mechanics and more powerful things being added to the game, it's just harder. There's like the flat power level is like Yasuo is like what? He's like a 2 or 3 out of 10 now. When he was released, he might have been like a 7 or 8 out of 10, right? And that is kind of hard in such a champion focused game. And that's something I think now that we have like 80 or 90 or I think it's 100 champions. I don't even know. It's really hard, especially for those bottom champions, to really have their moment. Obviously, Eternal has some of the problems of like, well, that's going to be even more tough for them to see play. But I'm excited about potentially doing more spicy changes, and we do plan on doing balance changes to Eternal. So it could be exciting space for us to sort of explore some more buffs to some of the underused champions once we've seen them settle in Eternal. That's something I know that Plink and I, as people who are just really passionate about live balance, have been we talk to each other all the time about like, okay, can we do something with this champion? Especially this one's rotating, this one's not. Like, how does that impact our balance decisions? It's kind of baked into everything that we do now in terms of live balance because we have that big moment of rotation this year. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully that adds some clarity. I realize that we have been getting some feedback around some players not necessarily being that excited about the rotation, but we have been learning from that a lot. I think that we've been using that as fuel to figure out, hey, like, how are we going to make sure that champions can still have their dream be realizable and stuff while they go into Eternal? So definitely keep coming with that kind of feedback.
With two questions that keep coming. First, did team talk about DK on ladder slash higher ranks Grandmaster Challenger? If not, how do you feel about it you personally? If the team didn't talk about it internally.
So we've talked about it, and actually, there's a few things going on. One, there's like in the new system, ladder isn't going to matter as much, but it's still going to matter. So it's something we actually are thinking about. The long-term sustainability of lore is improving the ladder experience. I think right now, I think that we can make some improvements. And I don't want to get too deep into it, but with something we're definitely looking at in terms of not necessarily even decay or ranked ladder, but like I feel like there's a stepping stone of like I think the first thing for us to do, and I've talked with I Am Walrus, John Mormon, game designer who knows a lot about MMR and systems design, since that's what he did when he worked on League of Legends. We've been talking about it. I think our first step is actually just improving what we have. Like I think right now we see some behavior that ends up, being not really satisfying for players, where ever since we've made the sort of like more players are in masters, we just see a lot of players in low LP. I do think it is important for us to sort of address the system right now. For Decay, I'm personally not a fan of Decay. I mean, and maybe I can be wrong on this one. As a competitive player, like, I don't, well, at least, I mean, I don't want to, sorry, these are my opinions. They don't always necessarily, whenever we make any design changes on lore, they go through the whole design team. So it's kind of a very collaborative. But my opinion is any sort of forced grind is usually not that exciting for me. It's almost a turnoff for me. If I have to play in a tournament, or that's a weird example, but because since tournaments are usually like you probably have to play in like the biggest tournaments. But if I have to do something, like if I have to play 10 or 7 ladder games a week, that really is gonna turn me off of the system. So I think we'd be very careful about Decay. In terms of Grandmaster, and this is very philosophical. We don't have any current plans on implementing Grandmaster, but I do think now with so many players in Masters, it would be nice if there was like another stepping stone where you qualify into a different pool of players, especially because right now, like, and part of this is just like for matchmaking purposes, but you end up, players have like thousands of LP and they'll match against a 0 LP player, right?
Even Diamond
Um,
1.
even Diamond 1. Though it's funny because I think that Diamond, at least this is my experience playing ladder, is like 0 LP Master is probably easier to beat than Diamond 1, since
That's
Diamond
true.
1 player is like actually probably trying to climb and their points matter. So they're probably playing a meta deck or something. Not always, actually, not always. But yeah, I think that there is some need to improve our current ladder. I'm not going to promise anything here other than that we're looking at the current system for some small changes. But stuff like Decay, definitely off the table. I think some sort of Grandmaster League is intriguing, and I can definitely talk to the team about that.
Well, awkward midroll, like the odd midroll had to roll in, and a lot of people just got like an ad for a minute, so we can chill a bit and talk about something
Okay.
casual, so people don't lose too much. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
like I think, like personally, I agree with you on the decay, but I think getting something higher, like for example, 500-600 LP, and then you go hop on the another step on the would be something nice, and also like for like it feels like you completed another step. Like it feels like, especially if you'll take away a bit the purpose of the ladder, it would be nice to have like that accomplishment of just reaching another rank perhaps, and also it would fit the matchmaking purposes for the ladder, because like again, a lot of people still love jamming ladder, myself included, and
Oh yeah.
DK won't be as important if you take away the importance of the ladder as well. So I think that the stuff that you have guys prepared for the future will solve that issue.
Yeah, I think that like a lot of the issue, some of it, not a lot of them, but some of the issues are definitely systematic to player incentives. Like, oh, you need to be top 30 of the ladder to get the free win, and then that can give you more seasonal points or top fours, which gets you into worlds. Like, we will have a lot of that sorted this year, but still the visceral, just like ladder is the most accessible way for anybody to play Runeterra. So no matter what we do, the system needs to be satisfying for players to progress, and it needs to be quite easy for players to jump in. That's kind of the purpose of ladder, which is why all the time when people suggest things like best of 3 ladder, we're very nervous about that type of thing, because it doesn't necessarily meet the goals of like fast, satisfying progression and just being able to jump in easily. Um, so yeah, there's definitely things to think about there. Ladder. I'm not saying that ladder is completely deprioritized. It will still have some purpose this year, but we're really focusing on figuring out how to make gauntlets and tournaments, kind of the same thing, but how to make them more involved. Yeah, any last thoughts or questions
Yeah, well,
before I head
I
off?
was about to say that one more question before we let you go, because I know you said 45 minutes, but I'm just
Yeah,
squeezing
I'm good.
a bit more, as long as you're okay with that. There is a lot of people asking about limited. Is there any plans in the future to replace the expeditions?
Yeah, so we do want to have a new limited mode, and for players that don't know, limited just means instead of you pre-constructing a deck, you are building a deck out of a sort of like a pool of randomly generated cards. Somehow, different games do it different ways. We used to have the expeditions mode. We are thinking about ways of doing that um, in the future, and it's something that even I've been asking recently to Dave about, who's our game director, figuring out resourcing out time for the mode, because we think that there's absolutely a need for PvP limited, right?
Oh,
Because I
I would
think
love to
that
play
Path
some.
of Champions scratches that box for limited, but it doesn't for PvP, right? For our PvP players. As somebody who worked many years on expeditions mode, doing buckets and doing trade picks and stuff. I definitely am a huge fan of limited myself. So hopefully hopefully it's not a nothing burger. We are thinking about limited and figuring out a way. But currently taking things one step at a time. So hopefully we see that in the future. But the need is there, and when the need is there, I know passionate rioters will step up and try to fill it for sure.
Happy to hear that still stays at least somewhere in the box, and it's still considered. All right, I'll let you go, Rubin. Thank you a lot for being here. Hopefully, we can do this a bit more
Yeah.
often. Maybe we can do some jumps, some games. I always love that.
Yeah.
To do.
Did you ever go over the games from the World Championships, like on stream or anything? I might have missed it if you did. That could be
I
fun.
I think I did the finals.
Oh, right.
Like we talked about it, but yeah, Teddy had could have won
Right.
the games if he played perfectly.
Yeah, that I'm totally happy to do that, especially since that's a little, just to
Oh,
hop on and talk about lore stuff. But yeah, that game lives rent free in my head because if he attacks with the Dark Enthrall,
yeah,
then it forces the Spiderling to block, and
yeah,
he has one more health, so he can catch or hit Pot of Pain to not die. But he was playing around Harrowing and not necessarily
exactly,
the Reckoner. And
exactly.
he had the timer, so like I don't think you can expect anybody to make that play, but just goes to show how freaking awesome competitive lore is.
Yeah, you have
That
to
I'm still
decide.
thinking about that now. But yeah, shout out to Teddy and Aragorn. One last thing that I wanted to say, because I thought I'd have a chance to say it, and I wanted to make sure that there was real news on this, is that Aragorn will be qualified for the World Final next year. We wanted to make sure that the world champion got
Congratulations.
a re-invite. And yeah, I just wanted to make sure to announce that here so that he knows. I don't know if he's watching right now, probably not, but wanted to carry that forward as part of our new world system.
Pretty sure he'll know, yeah, today yet, even if he doesn't watch. Yeah, chat is mocking at me because, yeah, that's a 1 year late change.
Yeah,
Robin.
No, that's kind of a dagger, but since we already kind of talked about,
good, man.
It was inadvertent.
It's fine.
Since we already
it's
talked
fine.
about, worlds changing this year and potentially being a little bit bigger, that yeah, I wanted to make sure, since I think last year it was just too small of a field to do that kind of thing. But
It's
hey,
all
I mean,
good.
do you think that EMEA is going to win 3 years in a row and just silence the haters?
Is that even a question?
I mean, I think y'all are favored.
Like, at this point, it's just an expectation. Like, if anything else happens, it's just gonna be a surprise. Like, come on.
I mean, we got Teddy and Aragorn in the finals.
Yeah.
We got, y'all really beat up on NA in groups,
Who? I've barely seen.
America's not NA.
I mean, I like after this, the last Worlds, I understood why you give to NA so many slots.
The 6 slots.
Yeah. Now it explains everything now. On that note, we'll be finishing up. Thanks everyone for hanging out, and hope you guys enjoyed a little talk with Rubin. Perhaps we could do after the seasonals some finals analysis together. If you like, yeah, and I think that would be fun to go over some games.
Okay, I'll see you later, man.
All right,
take care.
Take care. Thanks everybody for watching, and yeah, peace.